"Those documents are fabricated!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking as she slammed her acrylics against the hood of my truck. "You don't understand the context. This is slander. You're trespassing on HOA legal territory." But I wasn't even looking at her. I was handing over a folder, unmarked, thick, and lethal, to the VOPs standing by the county gate. Inside was everything. The side deals, the land theft, the backdated zoning records. I watched them flip through the pages, their eyes growing colder with every turn. Karen kept yelling, her face blotched red, lips twitching, mascara already breaking ranks down her cheekbones. She knew what was in that folder. And for the first time since she fenced off my land like she owned it, she was the one on the outside. I didn't say a word, just stepped back, crossed my arms, and nodded once to the deputy. The chain on the gate clanked open. Karen's empire was about to collapse, paper by paper, law by law. You ever watch a tyrant realize she's powerless in real time? That was the moment. It started the way land wars always do, not with a bang, but with a fence. I'd just come back from a 3-day work trip in D.C., stepped out of my truck with coffee in one hand and a saddle blanket over the other arm, ready to check on the horses. But something looked wrong. The morning light caught fresh metal in a place it shouldn't have been. I blinked, then blinked again. There, slicing clean through the west pasture like a surgeon's scar, was a brand new perimeter fence. 6 feet tall, pressure-treated posts, barbed wire strung tight and humming. No signage, no warning, and no damn permission. It cut directly across our grazing field and sealed off the back 10 acres. My horses were clustered up near the barn, snorting and pacing, clearly agitated, boxed out of their normal rotation. The water trough they'd been using was now behind the fence line. My stomach dropped. At first, I assumed it was a contractor mistake. Easements in our area got messy sometimes, especially near the old creek bed where survey lines blurred. But this wasn't sloppy. It was surgical. Whoever did this didn't guess. They measured. I followed the fence to its far corner and found a plastic tag zip tied to one of the posts. Tiny, just a barcode and a laminated slip that read, Section 4A, Easement Enforcement. Oakview Ranch Estates, HOA. My gut twisted into a rope. I wasn't just fenced out. I'd been invaded. I called the HOA that afternoon. No answer. I called again, this time leaving a voicemail with my full name, property address, and a request for immediate clarification. Then I sent an email. I got a reply 36 hours later, not from a person but from a generic HOA mailbox. Thank you for your inquiry. The recent perimeter adjustment is part of an authorized compliance operation per Article 9b of the Oakview Covenant. No apology, no explanation. Just vague legalese and a PDF copy of the bylaws, which I'd written most of when I helped the developer form this neighborhood years ago. I should have known then. When someone hides behind Article 9b before you even finish asking your question, it means they know what they did, and they know you're about to make it a problem. I drove to the HOA office, but the door was locked. A laminated sign announced new remote operations due to seasonal policy transition. That's not a thing. It never was. But there it was. A security camera followed me as I walked back to my truck. They were watching. That night, my wife Elise cried. Not from fear, from frustration. We had planned our daughter Ruby's birthday party in that pasture. Pony rides, games, a family reunion. All of it now split by an illegal wall like we were trespassers on our own land. 3 days later, we got our first citation. Unsecured livestock presenting hazard to adjacent lot. It was hand-delivered by a teenager in an oversized neon vest who practically threw it at our porch and ran off. The fine, $275. Due in 5 days. I stood in the driveway holding the paper like it was radioactive. The fence had boxed the horses in. They couldn't even reach the gate anymore. How the hell were we liable? I called again. Nothing. Emailed. Got another form reply. Then came a second citation. Obstruction of designated easement. Same fine, same threat. I scoured the county property map and my original plat. Nothing had changed. My deed line was clear. But when I logged into the HOA's resident portal, A new map had appeared under Resource Files. A corrected community overlay. It showed a dashed red line running right through my pasture, labeled Shared Access Corridor. My lot line had been sliced, digitally, not legally. It wasn't just a fence, it was a quiet coup. I started walking the property twice a day. Every time, I found something new. Plastic stakes with orange flags, spray-painted X's in odd corners, deep tire ruts from heavy machinery near the West Creek. One morning I spotted a gray contractor truck parked half on the road, half in the grass. No company name. Just two men in safety vests, jotting notes and measuring distances. They didn't acknowledge me. Didn't introduce themselves. Just packed up and drove off when I approached. Elise said it was probably maintenance. I knew better. Maintenance doesn't show up unannounced with custom topo gear and boundary flags. This was site prep. They were building something. I bought a drone the next day. Not a toy, the real kind. 4K long flight time, zoom lens. I launched it before dawn and ran a perimeter scan. What I found made my skin crawl. Behind the new fence line, on what was legally still my property, was a fresh dirt pad, rectangular, perfectly leveled. New gravel compacted around the edge. It looked like a staging area. On the far side, about 20 feet from the fence, someone had installed a small concrete foundation pad with conduit lines poking through. I hadn't approved any of this. No permit signs. No utility flags. Just construction happening in secret, inches over a line that didn't belong to them. I printed every frame of the drone footage and spread it out on the kitchen table. Ruby asked if it was a treasure map. Elise didn't say anything, just rubbed her temples and walked away. That night, I opened the locked fireproof box in the office closet and pulled out the original subdivision development maps, the ones I helped draw up when I served on the county's land committee. I compared them line by line to the HOA's corrected overlay. They didn't match. The HOA's map had shifted my western boundary by exactly 26 feet. On paper, they'd carved out a corridor that didn't exist. They were using my own planning blueprints against me, twisted, reinterpreted, and relabeled until I no longer recognized the land I'd fought to preserve. I reached out to my old friend Donnie, now head of zoning enforcement at the county office. We met for breakfast off the square, booth by the window. I slid him a copy of the HOA overlay and waited. He took one look, then let out a low whistle. "This ain't just sloppy," he said. "This is a backroom job. You see this notation? Someone added a rider after the approval stamp. That's fraud, Mark." I nodded. He leaned in. "And I've seen this contractor before. They're tight with Belden Development." My pulse jumped. Belden was the company Karen's cousin worked for. The same one that had tried and failed to buy up parcels on our side of the community 3 years ago? Donnie sipped his coffee. "You didn't lose that land. They're betting you'll just let it go." I didn't. I spent the next week documenting everything. GPS, tagged photos, footage, deed copies, email chains. I reached out to 3 neighbors who'd been hit with similar citations and found one who'd also noticed a fence shift. We compared our plats. Sure enough, his boundary had been redrawn too. Quietly. Digitally. Illegally. That was the moment I stopped hoping it was a mistake. That was the moment I started building the case. Not to appeal, not to argue, to bury them. Because this wasn't about a fence anymore. This was about theft. Legal theft. And they thought they could get away with it because most folks wouldn't notice the dirt pad until the concrete dried. They'd picked the wrong ranch, the wrong land, and the wrong man. The day I walked into the county registrar's office with 2 USB drives, a printed dossier, and the original developer plat rolled under my arm, I was no longer a homeowner trying to fix a problem. I was a hunter tracking a wounded animal through bureaucratic brush. Donnie met me in the back, behind the records counter, in a dusty side room where coffee rings stained every flat surface and the overhead light hummed like it had a grudge. We booted up his terminal, and I watched him type through 4 firewalls and 2 login screens until we hit the county's zoning change archive. He plugged in my drive, loaded the files I'd extracted from the HOA portal, and began side-by-side comparisons with the official county plat maps. "Jesus," he muttered, scrolling slowly. They didn't even try to hide the timestamp modification. Look here. Official submission says April 12, but this header? Compiled March 29. That's 2 weeks before the public notice was even printed. I leaned over his shoulder and read the metadata. Whoever uploaded it had stripped the original signature layer from the PDF and inserted a new one. A stamped approval from a now-retired zoning tech who hadn't been in office since last November. That's forgery, I said quietly. Donnie nodded without looking at me. That's felony forgery. He turned to me. And if this map got rubber-stamped with the rest, your land isn't the only one that got sliced. Over the next 2 days, we reviewed every zoning change pushed through in the last year under Oakview Ranch Estates HOA. They weren't sweeping changes. That would have raised alarms. Instead, they were surgical. Micro-adjustments to setback lines, reinterpretations of shared maintenance corridors, new notations labeled community infrastructure buffer zones. It was genius in its way. Every change just subtle enough to look plausible on its own. But when stitched together, they formed a patchwork net of reclassified land that funneled property access from individual owners straight into the HOA's control. And all of it was being funneled toward the same destination, a 14-acre plot of undeveloped land on the far north side of the community. That land, I discovered, had just been sold off-market. Not to a family, not to a private citizen, but to Belden Development Group, LLC. The ink was still wet. Karen had signed off on the final easement reclassification the same week the sale went through. I pulled the tax roll on the buyer, listed as Belden Holdings 6B. I ran the corporate registry. The contact agent? A man named Jeremy Lane, Karen Lane's cousin. I stared at the screen, rage building behind my eyes like a slow-boiling storm. It wasn't just a land grab, it was a coordinated shell game. The HOA, which was supposed to serve us, had become the front end of a privatized profit scheme. They created corridors that didn't exist, claimed them as community infrastructure, and then used that fabricated space as leverage to sell off larger parcels under the guise of utility improvement. And the worst part? Our dues had funded it. Our monthly payments had gone into the legal padding, the rezoning requests, the sham environmental impact statements. We were paying for our own land to be stolen. The next morning, I got a plain white envelope shoved under my office door. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a single Post-it note. You didn't hear this from me. I plugged it into an isolated laptop, expecting spam, maybe junk data. What I found instead were email chains, 6 months' worth, between Karen, 2 board members, and a Belden development rep. They discussed parcel coordination, selective enforcement strategies, and a compliance blitz meant to provoke landowners into abandoning or selling off disputed property. Pressure is key, one email read. If we hit them with citations, fines, and utility freezes, they'll cave. No one has the stomach for a long legal fight. We just need them to fold. In another, Karen typed, once we finalize Mark's corridor, the whole block opens up, 38 acres total. Don't worry, he's out of town 3 days a week. He won't notice in time. My hands shook as I scrolled. There it was, proof that they knew, proof that they targeted me. And more than that, confirmation that they were replicating the scam across multiple properties. At least 5 other owners were named. Reclassified Danvers parcel under erosion risk, one chain said. We'll leverage the landscaping codes. I recognized the name. Danvers was a retired Marine who'd told me a month ago that his fence permit had suddenly been denied. Karen had told him it was due to wetlands remediation. There was no wetlands. There never had been. I reached out to Donnie again. When I showed him the emails, his face went pale. You realize what this is? He asked, voice low. This is organized fraud. This is RICO territory. I nodded. Then let's build a case that burns down every inch of it. We cross-referenced every email against the HOA's public filings, matched phrases to meeting minutes, and flagged key inconsistencies. The HOA had held closed session meetings under the guise of legal counsel discussions, during which they signed off on land use changes, none of which appeared in official county hearing transcripts. Karen had kept the full board in the dark for most of it. The email showed her leveraging favors, offering reduced dues, landscaping allowances, and even private security patrols for board members who didn't ask too many questions. But one name stood out in the CC line of several messages. Neil Orson, a junior board member, the one who always looked nervous at the meetings. I found his number and texted him a single line. "I know what they're doing. I have proof. Meet me tonight." No pressure, but this is your only chance to be on the right side of this. To my surprise, he responded within 10 minutes. Where? We met in the parking lot of the old diner outside the subdivision. Neil sat in the passenger seat of my truck, shaking. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "They told me it was just a zoning cleanup," he said, eyes wide. "They promised the revenue would help fund the trail expansion. Karen said the overlays were already legal, that we were just clarifying things." I handed him a printout of the email with his name on it. "You were in the room when she greenlit the corridor reclassifications." He didn't answer for a long time, just stared through the windshield. Then he opened his own bag and pulled out a flash drive. "I copied the internal votes, the real ones. She changed them after the meetings. And I think she's been deleting board emails." I stared at him, genuinely stunned. "You're the one who sent me the drive, aren't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I thought if I gave it to you, maybe it would go away. But this is bigger than I thought. She's laundering easement value through Belden." That was the moment it all clicked. The reclassification wasn't just about selling the land. It was about inflating appraisals. Each corridor shifted property value calculations. Each fake maintenance zone added communal weight to a parcel being prepped for sale. Belden would buy the inflated land at community-enhanced value, then develop it for 10 times the price. Karen got kickbacks. The HOA got a development revenue share. And the owners? We got nothing but fences and fines. I went home that night and cleared out my study. Stacked every printout, every flash drive, every copy of every plat map into a single binder. I called an old friend at the state's Legal Ethics Commission and told him I had something big. Potential land use racketeering buried inside a suburban HOA. Then I drafted the timeline. Karen's emails. The date of the forged plats. The moment the illegal fence went up. The property sale. The citations. The bribes. I printed out every page, hole-punched them, and labeled the spine in thick black letters. Oakview Land Reassignment Fraud, Master File. I placed it in my truck's passenger seat and stared at it for a long time. They'd turned my pasture into a pawn in a real estate scam. They'd forged maps, manipulated zoning, and sold my land without touching the deed. But now, I had every piece of it. I wasn't just a rancher. I wasn't just a resident. I was the one man they shouldn't have played this game with, because I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't stopping. It didn't take long for Karen to figure out she'd been exposed. She must have felt it in the air, smelled it on the wind like a predator knows when it's no longer the hunter. Because almost overnight, the HOA's behavior changed, from smug silence to frantic aggression. It started small, like they were testing the limits. A sudden citation for unauthorized vegetation density in the drainage ditch behind our barn. That ditch had been dry for years. The unauthorized vegetation was native switchgrass I planted myself for soil retention. Then came the landscaping fine, $500 for an unapproved tree species near our fence line. Elise had planted that tree when Ruby was born. It was a flowering dogwood, state approved and on the HOA's own list. But none of that mattered anymore. Facts weren't part of the game. This was retaliation. And it was just warming up. The next week, a man in a reflective vest showed up at our gate with a clipboard and an attitude. "Routine inspection," he said, not identifying himself. I asked for his name. He refused. Asked again. He grunted something that didn't sound real and started snapping photos of our front porch, the shed, the dog bowl. "You can't be here without an appointment," I told him, keeping my voice level. "This is private property." He smirked and lifted the clipboard like it was a badge. Per Article 7, Subsection 4, the HOA reserves the right to conduct visual compliance assessments at any time. I smiled. Great. Then I reserve the right to notify the sheriff you're trespassing." He left, but not before leaving a bright yellow violation notice taped to our mailbox. Improper positioning of seasonal decor. It was mid-July. We had a metal star and a faded red wreath on the porch. Elise stood behind me as I read it, arms crossed tight. "This is punishment," she whispered. "They know, we know." That night, the irrigation line to our horse paddock mysteriously broke. Not just a leak, a clean sever, like it had been sliced. We had surveillance footage, but somehow the camera that covered that angle had glitched out for 2 hours during the night. Same thing happened again 3 nights later. This time, the breaker box that powered our barn fans had been tripped and zip-tied shut. The horses were agitated. Ruby couldn't sleep. Elise started checking the locks twice every night. I documented every incident. Photo, timestamp, repair cost. Logged it all into a spreadsheet that was now 3 tabs deep and growing. I wasn't retaliating. I was building. Quietly, legally, surgically. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. I could see it in the desperate HOA email blasts, new fines, updated bylaws, emergency compliance checks. She was flailing, trying to paper over her scheme with a tidal wave of procedural noise. Her latest decree was the most absurd yet. All homeowners had to submit proof of utility compliance for septic and gray water runoff within 7 days, or face a 1-0 fine and suspension of HOA privileges. That meant no gate access, no pool use, no landscaping services. I called it what it was, a siege. Starve the community into compliance. Make me the example. Show everyone what happens when you challenge the throne. But I didn't flinch. I just made more phone calls. I reached out to the land use attorneys network I'd built during my time drafting zoning policy. I sent encrypted files to an investigative reporter I knew from my days lobbying in the Capitol, someone who owed me a favor and had a particular hatred for HOA corruption. I looped in a regional watchdog group focused on municipal overreach, and I started meeting quietly with neighbors who'd been hit with similar tactics. The Danvers family, who got cited for aggressive ivy growth and had their front walkway dug up without permission. The Hales, whose roof color suddenly violated community tone continuity. The Gonzalez couple, fined into foreclosure last year over phantom maintenance fees. One by one, they came to me. Quiet knocks. Quiet stories. Karen had been running a campaign of attrition for years, moving lot lines, reclassifying easements, and bleeding homeowners dry with legalese no one could challenge. Until now. I didn't shout. I didn't protest. I compiled. For every fine I received, I filed a public records request. For every suspicious inspection, I filed a trespassing report. I drafted memos outlining the board members' exposure to personal liability under civil RICO statutes and sent them anonymously through legal courier to their private addresses. I included highlighted sections of the bylaws where Karen had overstepped and specific citations from state land law to back them. The effect was immediate. 2 board members resigned within a week, citing personal health concerns. A third refused to vote on a new set of fines and abstained from the next meeting. I didn't need them all to flip, just enough to collapse the quorum. Karen's next move was textbook desperation. She organized a community safety initiative, a volunteer patrol made up of HOA-friendly residents tasked with monitoring security infractions. They were issued fake badges, clipboards, and vests. I caught one crouching near our irrigation line with a measuring tape and a GoPro strapped to his chest. I walked up silently, snapped his photo, and asked if he was aware of the trespass statute he was violating. He stuttered, claimed he was just checking something, and bolted. The next morning, the HOA's website featured a photo of Karen cutting a red ribbon next to a fold-out table full of HOA compliance pamphlets. I printed it, annotated the legal violations in red Sharpie, and mailed it to the County Code Enforcement Office. Then I made the call that turned the pressure cooker into a live grenade. I filed a quiet preemptive motion with the county civil court. It was a request for emergency injunctive relief against the Oakview Ranch Estates HOA, citing unlawful seizure of land, zoning fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Attached to the motion, was a 200-page binder of evidence. Emails, forged plats, drone photos, damage logs, witness affidavits, and the full transcription of Neil Orson's whistleblower statements, signed and notarized. I didn't go public. Not yet. I wanted it on the record first. I wanted it in the system before Karen could spin the narrative. But I didn't stop there. I also filed a motion of discovery requesting every internal communication from the HOA in the past 12 months. That meant emails, text logs, meeting minutes, even Slack channels. I CC'd every remaining board member. I knew it would shake them. And it did. Within 3 days, the HOA issued a notice postponing all citations and compliance checks, pending legal review. Karen didn't appear at the next board meeting. Instead, a junior board member read a written statement that she was undergoing personal legal consultation and would be temporarily unavailable. Her silence was deafening. Meanwhile, local news started circling. The reporter I'd contacted had dug up property sales between Belden Development and HOA-connected shell companies going back 2 years. He ran a story titled, "The HOA That Sells Your Backyard Without Telling You." It aired Thursday night. By Friday, 3 more homeowners contacted me with stories of their own boundary lines mysteriously moving. The fire was lit. And Karen? She was running out of ground to stand on. Every word she'd tried to bury was now rising. In court filings, in news segments, in the emails, board members were now quietly forwarding me to protect their own skins. And I hadn't even played my full hand yet. The storm hit on a Tuesday. Bright skies, clean wind, but the kind of pressure you feel in your bones before everything breaks. It started at 9:02 minutes when 3 unmarked cars rolled up to the Oakview Ranch Estates HOA office, black sedans with federal plates, and the quiet hum of people who don't need to introduce themselves. Karen wasn't there yet. But the staff, her inner circle, were. And they froze when those doors opened. While they scrambled for excuses, the men in dark suits handed over warrants, sealed in plastic folders, every drawer, every laptop, every backup drive, all copied, all mirrored, all bagged. By 9:47 a.m., the entire HOA digital system was offline. Maintenance issue, the website said. What it should have said was, "This regime just died." I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was already downtown, standing beside a clean-shaven federal land use prosecutor named Vaughn McClintock, handing off the master case file I'd built over 3 months. We didn't shake hands. We nodded, professionals who understood each other. He opened the binder, skimmed the summary page, and raised one eyebrow. "You really did your homework," he said. I nodded. "She stole land. I wrote the rules that say she can't." He smiled faintly, then motioned to his assistant. "Get this upstairs. Now." By noon, the press had it. The story I'd buried into encrypted files and anonymous drops was finally set loose into the bloodstream of public truth. Channel 7 opened with it. Local HOA accused of massive land grab fraud, dozens of homeowners impacted. The footage showed redacted emails, photos of forged plats, and a slow pan across the concrete slab built on my fenced-off pasture. By 2 p.m., every phone line in the county records office was jammed. But the hammer hadn't dropped yet. That came at 6:13 p.m. at the monthly HOA board meeting. Karen showed up late, sunglasses on despite the indoor lights, flanked by 2 overcompensating board lackeys. She looked haggard, less like a queen, and more like a CEO, about to face shareholders who finally read the earnings report. She didn't speak as she entered, didn't make eye contact. Just stormed to the front table and dropped a binder thicker than a phone book in front of her. "Let's begin," she said, voice tight. "We have misinformation to address." But she never got the chance. Because 2 minutes later, the side doors opened and the sheriff walked in, uniform crisp, posture straight, warrant in hand. The room fell into silence. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just the unmistakable scrape of the sheriff's boots against the floor as he stepped up to the podium and said, flatly, "Karen Lane, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, forgery of public documents, racketeering under Civil Code Section 895, and obstruction of justice." Karen turned to run. Not far, just a pivot, a reflex of someone who still thought she could spin her way out of this. But she didn't get 2 steps before a deputy caught her by the arm and clamped the cuffs around her wrists. "This is illegal," she hissed. "You have no right. This is a vendetta. This is a personal attack." Her voice cracked, splintering into that shrill, hysterical pitch of someone who's just realized the camera is not on her side anymore. The news crew caught it all. From the moment she screamed to the second she was let out of the building, shoulders hunched, makeup streaking. Her face plastered across every local network before the hour was up. And that was just the beginning. Vaughn moved fast. By Thursday, 5 more board members were served subpoenas. 3 resigned outright. 1 turned state's witness. The last tried to delete her HOA emails and got hit with obstruction charges. The case was airtight. Fraudulent easement overlays, falsified vote records, land use reclassification without legal consent. And the cherry on top? The money trail from Belden Development's shell accounts straight into a PAC controlled by Karen's brother-in-law. Wire transfers, memo lines, dates, it was all there. And every time they tried to deny it, a new document surfaced. Anonymous leaks, whistleblower files, depositions. By the end of the month, the County Council voted 7-0 to freeze all Oakview HOA activities pending legal outcome. A federal task force had been assigned to oversee reclassification and restitution. A civil order suspended all enforcement authority. All fines and citations were voided. And the new homeowners coalition, led by myself, the Danvers family, and 3 ex-board members, filed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. The vote passed 92-3. Oakview Ranch Estates HOA, as a legal entity, was terminated. Its assets frozen. Its board stripped of any authority. And its name? Scrubbed from the county database. But I wasn't done. Because while Karen burned, I rebuilt. I drafted a new county ordinance. Language clean, direct, brutal. It barred any homeowners association from redrawing property lines, reclassifying easements, or altering access rights without unanimous consent of affected parties and public zoning board review. It established criminal liability for violations, backed by civil penalties and personal accountability for board officers. And it passed, unanimously. Because I wrote it in a way no politician could oppose. As protection for homeowners. As justice. I stood behind the governor as he signed it. Didn't make a speech. Didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. A week later, I got the call from code enforcement. "You want to be here when we take it down?" the officer asked. I did. So I was. I watched the backhoe roll onto my land and slam its claw into the fence Karen had built. The metal groaned, splintered, and collapsed. Post by post, wire by wire. The men worked fast. 42 minutes later, every trace of it was gone. I shook the foreman's hand, thanked the crew. Then I walked to the edge of the pasture, breathed deep, and just stood there. No walls. No watchers. Just open land and the creak of saddle leather as Ruby trotted past me on her pony, waving, her hair tied back like her mother used to wear it. I stood on the porch that evening, coffee in hand, watching the sun dip low over the ridge. Elise sat beside me, her feet up, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You did it," she said. I shook my head slowly. We did it. Behind us, the house was quiet, peaceful. No more knocks. No more citations. Just the sound of wind in the grass and the distant whinny of horses free to run wherever they damn well pleased. I turned my eyes to the oak tree near the fence line, the one Karen once said, encroached into visual harmony. On it now hung a rusted, dented HOA sign, bullet-holed and warped. I'd mounted it there myself. As a trophy. As a warning. Because some battles you don't win with arguments. You win them with records, with truth, with patience sharpened into law. Karen thought she was untouchable because she wore the crown. But I don't need a crown. I write the laws that decide who gets one. And she forgot that. She forgot who I was, forgot what I knew. And now, she'll never forget again.